I was standing in his kitchen, a steaming cup of tea in my hand, when the phone rang. It was the voice of my son, Derek, so strange and distant I thought for a moment I had the wrong number. "Mom," he said, his voice as flat as if he were reading an announcement. "Vanessa and her parents are moving into the lake house. We figured you don't need it anymore. You're older now, and it's a waste for you to live there alone. I'll handle all the paperwork." I heard every word, each one dropping like a bead of ice into boiling water. I asked, "What do you mean?" He replied curtly, "The house is theirs now." I was silent for a few seconds, hearing only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then I said softly, "If that's what you want, Derek, I understand." Then I hung up. No apology, no word of thanks, only a final silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood there for a long time, looking out the window where the leaves were gently falling. Outside, the sunset stretched across Lakewood, the water as still as a mirror. That was the house where James, my husband, had sketched the first design on a scrap of paper, the place where we raised Derek from the time he was a 4-year-old boy who loved running around the yard. Every corner of the house bore the touch of James's hands. Every brick held the echo of a once happy family's laughter. I couldn't believe that in just a few sentences, all of that was being cast aside like an old piece of furniture. I didn't feel anger, not immediately. What I felt was an emptiness, a strange tranquility, as if my mind had stepped back to observe itself. I sat down at the dining table, next to the wooden box where I kept James's old letters untouched. The one on top was written 8 years ago, just after he had recovered from a heart attack. "If you ever have to choose between holding on and letting go," he wrote, "choose to hold on, not for the house itself, but for what it represents." A small smile touched my lips, so faint no one would have noticed it had they been there. I put the letter down, opened a drawer, and took out my car keys. A single thought echoed in my mind. I had to go there. I had to see for myself what was happening. 2 hours later, I turned onto the small road leading to the lake house, the same road James had repaved stone by stone after he retired. By the time I pulled up to the porch, the sun had nearly set. A golden light stretched across the water, casting final streaks of red onto the pale gray stone walls. I walked up the steps, and the scene before me made me freeze. Derek was sitting in his father's armchair, legs crossed, shirt sleeves rolled up, a glass of red wine gleaming in the lamplight. Beside him sat Vanessa, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a faint smile on her lips but her eyes cold. Next to them were Gerald and Patricia, her parents, dressed elegantly, laughing and talking as if they were in their own home. Derek was no longer the boy who used to look at me with grateful eyes. He looked straight at me, calm, almost defiant. "Mom, this isn't a good time," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're having dinner with Vanessa's parents. This is going to be their home. You can stay in the city apartment. It's more convenient." I didn't answer right away. I looked around the living room, saw the blanket James had knitted still draped over the sofa, the wooden clock on the wall still ticking, the family photo still on the mantelpiece, but everything felt as though it had been invaded by the unfamiliar presence of these 4 people. I walked slowly toward the table, my fingers brushing against the polished wood that James and I had oiled every winter. "Since when?" I asked, my voice low. "Did something that belongs to our family become a gift for others?" Vanessa set her wine glass down, tilting her head. "Since you no longer needed it. You can visit on weekends, but they need a home. Don't cling to the past, Mom." I heard her words and felt the fine line between pity and contempt. Derek was silent, his gaze averted. Patricia smiled, the smile of a victor. Gerald said, "We truly appreciate your generosity, Evelyn. We'll take excellent care of the house." I looked at him, then at Derek. "And you thought a simple announcement was all it would take? Right here, in my home?" He lifted his head, his voice dry. "Being direct is better than pretending. We've spoken to a lawyer. The paperwork is almost done." I felt my breath slow, my palms tremble slightly, but I still managed to smile. a smile that I knew flustered Vanessa for a brief second. I set my handbag down and sat in the chair opposite them. "If you've prepared everything," I said, "then I won't stand in your way. But there's one thing you never learned, Derek, and that is to never assume that the silent one is the weak one." No one said another word. There was only the sound of wine swirling in a glass and the wind from the lake blowing through the open window. I felt something inside me close shut, and another door, deeper, colder, and much brighter, swing open. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to protest. I just needed to wait. Because sometimes, to protect what is yours, the only thing you need to do is be silent and let others reveal their true nature. The next morning, a thin layer of fog covered Lakewood, as white and vast as a tablecloth. I woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and stood silently by the window. There was no sound but the dripping of water from the eaves and the calls of birds in the pine forest. I thought about last night's conversation, about Derek's voice, so cold and impassive I couldn't recognize it as the child who once ran through this house looking for his father in the workshop. Everything had changed, and I knew I was facing something greater than hurt. It was a test of my composure. Sometimes a reaction is what people expect. Silence is what they fear. I put my coffee cup down, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The morning air smelled of damp wood and lake water. In the distance, I heard the sound of an engine, then the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the gate. Derek got out first, wearing a crisp white shirt and light khaki pants, his appearance neat, but his eyes unsettled. Behind him were Vanessa, in a beige fur coat with her hair tied back, her face meticulously made up, and her parents, Gerald and Patricia. They were dressed as if for a party, not a move. I didn't ask why they had come so early. The answer was in Vanessa's eyes. She walked straight up to the porch, her smile sickeningly sweet. "Good morning, Evelyn. I hope we're not disturbing you," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "We just wanted to look over the space again, to prepare for moving in this weekend." I looked at Derek, but he avoided my gaze. "It's fine," I replied, my voice calm. "If you want to look, then look." Gerald stepped forward, surveying the house with the eyes of a real estate agent. "This place is magnificent. The lake view is breathtaking," he said. "I can already envision a few small changes to modernize it." Patricia gave a slight laugh, glancing around the living room. "We'll definitely have to repaint. This color is a bit dreary." Vanessa nodded in agreement, walking toward the sofa. She placed her handbag on the table, right on the wooden surface James and I had varnished by hand. I followed, my eyes scanning every familiar detail. Everything held the breath of memory, from our wedding photo to the old rug on the floor. I remembered every little scratch, every scent of wood polish James had left behind. Now it all felt violated, not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. Derek turned to me and said, "I told you, Mom, they need this place more than you do. You have the apartment in Burlington. It's much more convenient." I held his gaze, my voice steady. "And you've forgotten that this house belongs to the Hart Family Trust?" He frowned. "I'll have the papers redrawn. It will all be legal." Gerald interjected, his voice smooth. "We're very grateful, Evelyn. I assure you the house will be kept in pristine condition." I smiled, a smile that made him pause for half a second. "To preserve is not to change," I said. "It is to appreciate what is already there." Patricia gave a half smile. "We just want to bring in a breath of fresh air. You understand, the younger generation prefers things more modern." I didn't reply, just watched them walk around the room as if measuring something. Vanessa opened a window, letting a cold draft sweep in. "The air is so fresh," she said. "See, Mom? It will be good for the children when they visit. Everyone will be happier here." I let them talk, each word like a small knife slicing through me. Gerald held a folder in his hand and said gently, "Evelyn, I've reviewed the file. Just a few more signatures are needed. It will be quick. We won't trouble you for long." Derek cut in. "Don't worry, Mom. Everything is prepared." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said, "because I'm prepared too." My response made Vanessa frown slightly. Gerald stopped and looked at me. And Derek hesitated. I said no more, just stepped out onto the porch and looked at the lake. The water was still, reflecting the silver-gray sky. I could hear them talking behind me, the clinking of glasses, a soft laugh. In that moment, I felt as if I had already left this house, standing outside the story, observing those who were so confident in their victory. I knew I didn't need to scream or argue, I just needed to be patient. This house wasn't just an asset, it was a testament to love and trust. I had lived long enough to understand that anything of value must be protected with silence at the right time. When Vanessa turned to ask, "Mom, would you like to stay for dinner with us?" I replied, "No, I'll be back on the day you move in. I'll bring a few necessary things then." I looked at Derek, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Perhaps he realized my smile was different now. It was no longer one of resignation, but another kind of quiet, deeper and colder. I turned, walked down the steps, and felt the chill of the wind brush my shoulders. As the car pulled away, I saw their reflection in the rearview mirror. 4 people standing on the porch, looking small against the vastness of the lake. I knew they thought they had won, and perhaps they were right. But they had forgotten that what made me silent wasn't weakness, but the knowledge of what I would do next. I drove back to my small apartment in Burlington as dusk settled. Streetlights cast a yellow glow on the windows, shimmering like strips of old memories sliding across a mirror. Derek's voice, cold and unfamiliar, still echoed in my head, mingled with Vanessa's soft laughter and Gerald's feigned amiability. Each sound was like a small blade against my memory of James. He used to say, "They can take everything, Evelyn, except your self-respect." I stopped the car in front of the building and sat for a few minutes. Beside me was the old wooden box containing James's letters, which I had kept carefully since the day he passed. I opened it and took out a slightly yellowed letter. His handwriting was still firm, just like the man himself. "If they ever forget the value of this place," he wrote, "remind them with your composure, not with your words." I read it twice, then tucked the letter into my coat pocket. A strange feeling rose within me, not quite anger, not quite sorrow, but a state of absolute clarity. James believed that all wrongdoing eventually exposes itself if one is patient enough to watch. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the small dining table, and looked out the window where the city lights cast shadows on the wall. The flickering lights were like the heartbeat of a newly formed plan. I remembered every detail James had left behind, every document he had carefully stored in the safe in the villa's basement. That villa wasn't just a house, it was an extension of the love and trust we had built together for 40 years. I opened a drawer and took out a small silver key labeled Hart Family Trust. James had given it to me in the hospital just before he left. If anyone tries to blur the lines, remember, everything is on paper. I held it in my hand for a long time, the metal reflecting on my trembling fingers. All I needed now was clarity, not to fight, but to remind them. I picked up my phone and found the number for Marcus Hale, an old friend who had worked with James on a banking project in Boston. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years. A calm, familiar voice answered on the other end. "Evelyn, it's been a long time." I replied, "Marcus, I need to see you. It's about an estate and a document that may have been forged." A short pause, then he said, "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, my office in Boston. Don't say anything over the phone." I agreed, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the distant sound of sirens blended with the rhythm of rain on the roof. I looked down at my palm, where the small key lay still, and realized I was holding not just metal, but a piece of James, of everything we had ever believed in. I couldn't sleep that night. I went through a cabinet and pulled out an old file. The insurance policy, the certificate of ownership, and the original Hart Family Trust deed that James had signed with his lawyer 10 years ago. It was all intact. Our signatures were clear on every page, fully notarized. This meant the villa had never belonged to me personally, and certainly not to Derek. It belonged to the family trust, where James had included a clause. No party shall be permitted to sell, gift, or transfer the property while the second founder is still living. I let out a soft laugh, a mix of relief and bitterness. Derek, with his forged papers, had no idea that the game was over before it had even begun. The next morning, I drove to Boston. The road was long, the rain drizzled, but my mind was unusually calm. When I arrived, Marcus was waiting at a coffee shop near the FBI office, where he now worked in the Financial Crimes Division. He still had his unhurried demeanor, his bright eyes, and his gentle smile. "I thought I was coming to help with a small family matter," I said as I sat down, "but it might be more complicated." Marcus nodded and gestured for the file. I took the copy of the power of attorney Derek had emailed me last week from my bag. Marcus glanced at it for only a few seconds before frowning. "This is a forgery, Evelyn. And if he submitted it online, it falls under federal jurisdiction. He could be investigated for fraud and forgery of a public document." I looked at him, my voice steady. "I don't want to send my son to prison. I just want him to understand that you cannot steal what was built with love." Marcus set his coffee cup down and looked at me for a long moment. "Then let me handle the legal side. You just stay calm, the way you always have." I nodded, thanked him, and left the cafe. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the wet pavement reflected the streetlights. I felt as though my feet had their own weight as they touched the ground. I didn't know what was to come, but I knew I was no longer afraid. I returned to Burlington in the dim afternoon light. When I reached the apartment, I opened the window and looked toward the distant Lakewood. The wind carried the smell of water, reminding me of the scent of James's skin whenever he held me from behind, his voice raspy. "Everything will find its place, Evie." I nodded slightly, as if he were standing right there. "Its rightful place," I repeated. I knew from that moment on, the game was no longer Derek's. It had entered a world I understood better than anyone, a world of laws, of documents, and of powerful silence. I took out my phone, noted the date of my meeting with Marcus, and then, on a clean sheet of paper, wrote 3 words: Heart, Family, Trust. Beneath them, I signed my name. It was more than a signature. It was a promise to James and to myself that the lake house would always belong to those who truly understood its value. 3 days later, I received a call from Vanessa. Her voice was as smooth as silk, but her barely concealed smugness was palpable. "Are you free tonight, Mom?" she asked. "I'd like to invite you to have dinner with the family. My parents would also like to see you to discuss the villa further, just an intimate meal." I knew exactly what intimate meant in Vanessa's vocabulary. I looked out the window, where the afternoon sun flooded the old rooftops of Burlington. "All right," I replied. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I stood and opened my closet, choosing a simple charcoal gray dress that James had always liked. I didn't need to prove anything. I just wanted them to see what they had never understood. Composure could also be a weapon. The restaurant was on a bustling downtown street, its warm lights spilling onto the brown leather booths. When I walked in, they were already seated. Vanessa waved, her smile practiced in a mirror. Derek rose reluctantly to pull out my chair, while Gerald and Patricia offered polite smiles. "So glad you could make it," Vanessa said, her voice a little higher than usual. I nodded, my eyes sweeping over the table. Red wine, scented candles, and expensive dishes were arranged as carefully as a ceremony. "What will you have?" Gerald asked. "The steak here is famous." "I'll have the vegetarian option tonight." "Thank you," I replied softly. The atmosphere started off light, but after a few pleasantries, I realized Vanessa had no intention of discussing family matters. She wanted to perform. "You know," she said, her tone both intimate and distant, "we've already started sketching out a new layout for the villa. I think we should remove the old brick wall and repaint everything in a cream white. It would look so much brighter." Patricia nodded in approval, raising her glass as if to toast the idea. I smiled faintly and set my spoon down. That villa was designed by James. Every brick, every line has its reason. The color of the brick isn't for aesthetics. It's to prevent moisture from seeping into the wooden walls. Vanessa gave a faint laugh. Times have changed, Mom. People prefer a modern look now. And my parents are funding the entire renovation, so you don't have to worry about the cost. I remained silent, listening to the soft clink of silverware against plates. Gerald spoke up, his voice smooth. Evelyn, we truly admire the house. It has immense value in its location and architecture. With a few changes, I believe it would be perfect. I looked at him, my smile unwavering. Perfection is a dangerous concept, Mr. Gerald. People often destroy the most beautiful things in their pursuit of it. Patricia cleared her throat, her smile no longer looking so natural. Of course, she said. We only want what's best for our daughter, a home that reflects our family's standing. The words were like a needle piercing through the fog of civility. Derek looked up, glancing from his wife to me. I think they have a point. The house is old. You can't live there forever. I swirled the water in my glass, watching the ripples reflect the light. The house isn't old, Derek. Only people who forget who they once were become old. He frowned, about to say something, but Vanessa was quicker. Mom, she said, her voice laced with false pity. Sometimes older people have a hard time with change. We understand. But you'll see, this is a sensible decision. You're hardly ever there. My parents will live there, and you can still visit whenever you like. I set my glass down, my voice low. Thank you for being so generous. For a few seconds, silence enveloped the table. The waiter brought the main courses, the aroma of butter and wine thick in the air. I could smell it, but I tasted nothing. I just looked at Derek and noticed something different in his eyes. It was no longer confidence, but a flicker of hesitation. Perhaps he too felt that something was wrong. I leaned forward, my voice low enough for only him to hear. You forged the signature on the power of attorney, didn't you? Derek froze, his hand tightening on his knife. What are you talking about? I smiled faintly. Nothing, just asking. Vanessa interjected, her smile forced. Let's not talk about paperwork at dinner, shall we? Tonight is for connecting. Connecting, I repeated. It's fascinating how some people call taking something from others connecting. Gerald coughed, trying to break the tension. Come, let's raise a glass. To new beginnings. They raised their glasses. I did not. I stared at my own glass, its contents the color of clotted blood in the candlelight. Patricia leaned over. Evelyn, aren't you drinking? I shook my head slightly. I never drink when I have something to remember clearly the next morning. The statement made Vanessa's brow furrow for a moment. I smiled, looking at Derek. You should check your work email tomorrow, Derek. There might be a few surprises. The table fell silent. Only the soft melody of a piano drifted from a corner of the restaurant. I sat there composed, watching each face trying to maintain its confident facade. That evening, they thought they had won, that I had accepted defeat in silence. But in reality, it was the moment they didn't know the game had truly begun, and they were the first to step onto the board I had quietly set. I left the restaurant just as the clock struck 8. The cold wind swept through the street, carrying the scent of wine still lingering on my sleeve. I knew from that moment on, none of them would rest easy again. The next morning, I awoke before sunrise. The Burlington sky was a thick, oppressive gray, and raindrops traced winding paths down the windowpane like memories. I sat up and brewed a cup of strong black coffee, the bitterness on my tongue a reminder that some things cannot be swallowed with time alone. Last night's dinner remained vivid in my mind, from Vanessa's practiced smile to Derek's uneasy gaze. Everything at that meal had been staged as carefully as a play, and I knew I was just a supporting character in their script. But they had forgotten that I, too, had written a script, the script of my own life, where I never let anyone else hold the pen. I put my coffee down, put on my coat, and gathered the necessary papers. On the table, the forged power of attorney lay next to the original Hart Family Trust deed that James and I had signed. I knew it was time to turn to the one person I could trust, Marcus Hale. The drive to Boston took over 2 hours, but I drove slower than usual that morning. The rain had stopped, leaving only a mist clinging to the trees along the road. As I neared the city, the clouds began to break, and a weak light filtered through the leaves. I rolled down the window and took a deep breath. The air smelled of damp wood and fog, a scent that reminded me of James. He used to say that every road has its own sound, and Lakewood's was the sound of honesty. I didn't know if he was right, but I knew I was on a road leading me to the truth. Boston appeared with its mix of old and modern buildings, its hurried crowds and dense traffic. I parked near the old town and entered the small coffee shop Marcus had chosen. It looked exactly as it had 10 years ago. Marcus was already at a corner table, his back to the window, dressed in a neat gray suit, his hair silvered at the temples, but his eyes still bright. He stood, that familiar half-smile on his face. "Evelyn," he said, "it's been too long." I nodded, a thin smile on my lips. "Over 10 years, and I wish I were here today for a different reason." He gestured for me to sit. "Coffee, the usual?" "Black, no sugar," I replied. Once the waiter left, I opened my bag and took out the file. "Marcus, I need you to look at this." He put on his glasses and carefully turned each page. I saw his expression darken the moment he saw the forged signature. "Who did this?" he asked. "My son," I answered, my voice steady. "And it seems he didn't do it alone. I need to know if submitting documents online can be investigated at a federal level." Marcus put the papers down and leaned toward me. "If he submitted it through the online property registry, then yes, that's federal jurisdiction. Evelyn, you're talking about forgery of a public document and wire fraud. I can report it, but—" He hesitated. I cut him off. "I don't want to send my son to prison. I just want the truth on record, and I want them to know they can't touch this." I pointed to the Hart family trust file. "This is the original deed. Any other copy is worthless." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. "You always had your own way of fighting, Evelyn. James used to say that." I smiled faintly, and he was always right. We sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the soft rain outside. Marcus continued, "I'll handle this discreetly. None of them will know. I need you to send me a digital copy of the document Derek submitted. Once the system confirms the forgery, we'll launch a financial investigation. But don't make a move yet. You have to let them believe you know nothing." I nodded. "You can count on that. They think I'm weak, Marcus. They always have. And I'm going to let them keep thinking it." He gave a small laugh. "I remember you were always a woman who knew how to choose her moment." Before leaving, Marcus handed me his new business card. On the back, he had written in small script, "Keep calm, let them move first." I took it and put it in my wallet like a mantra. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely, and a patch of light was breaking on the horizon. I paused, looking at the tall FBI building in the distance, feeling as though I was at a turning point. I wasn't afraid. I felt only a quiet conviction, the kind James had left me. On the way back to Burlington, I turned on the radio, letting the music fill the empty space. Each melody was like a ticking clock. I thought of Derek, of Vanessa, of how they had backed themselves into a corner. I didn't need to do much, just wait. Behind me, the smoky spires of Boston faded in the rearview mirror. When I reached Lakewood, the sun had disappeared behind the trees. I stopped the car by the lake and got out. The cold wind blew through my hair, carrying the scent of water and dry leaves. I looked at the villa in the distance, still standing there, silent and beautiful, as if waiting for someone to return. "I won't let them take you from me, James," I whispered. "Not while I'm still breathing." Then I turned and walked into the forest's shadow, leaving behind the last light reflecting on the still lake. The mornings at Lakewood always began with a peculiar stillness. No sirens, no passers-by, just the rustle of wind through the maple trees and the soft lapping of lake water against the shore. I returned to my small apartment in Burlington after the trip to Boston, feeling both heavy and light. Heavy for what was to come, light because I finally held a key to the story. In my coat pocket, Marcus's card was still creased. Every time I touched it, I heard his words, "Keep calm, let them move first." The phrase repeated in my mind like a steady pulse, a reminder of the game I was entering, a game of silence, time, and precision. I brewed a pot of lavender tea. The gentle aroma filled the small room. James used to say that the scent of tea could make you think more slowly, and sometimes thinking slowly was the way to win. I sat at the table and opened an old, worn-out notebook where I kept notes on important matters. On a new page, I wrote a single line. When they believe they have won is precisely when they are about to lose. Need them. I paused, took a sip of tea, and began to plan. The first step was to make Derek and Vanessa believe I had completely surrendered. They needed to feel safe, to think I had given up. I opened my laptop and wrote a short email to Derek. I think you're right. The apartment in Burlington is enough for me. If you need the villa sooner, feel free. I just want to pick up a few mementos. I reread it, then hit send. Within minutes, a reply came. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. Vanessa is so happy you've accepted. I promise we'll keep everything tidy. I looked at the screen, my own smile reflected in the glass. Just as I had predicted, give them a little reassurance, and they would open the door for me themselves. I sipped more tea, then opened the Hart Family Trust file. In the morning light, the red seal stood out. I scanned each page and sent a copy to Marcus. My message was brief. Done. Stay safe. A few minutes later, he replied, Received. Monitoring the system now. Stay in touch, Evelyn. I closed the laptop, feeling my breathing even out. That afternoon, I stopped by the small flower shop downtown. The owner, an old woman with silver hair, recognized me immediately. It's been a while since you bought flowers, she said. What will it be today? I chose a bouquet of lavender and one of white roses. Lavender for memory, white roses for peace, she said with a kind look. I just smiled. I need both. As I left the shop, I saw my reflection in the glass. A calm face, clear eyes. I was no longer the woman being pushed out of her own home. I was the one preparing to take it back, in a way they could never expect. In the evening, I sat in my living room, the files spread on the table next to my laptop. I opened a new tab and logged into the city's record system. Marcus had sent me a temporary tracking code, a tool that would allow him to trace any login or document submission related to the name Hart Family Villa. Ta-da! When I entered the code, a line appeared on the screen. Active file located. IP, Burlington Financial Network. My heart slowed. That was the firm where Derek worked. He hadn't just forged personal documents. He had used his company's server to submit the fake file. This meant his actions were not just a personal misstep, but a federal crime. I took a deep breath and shut the computer. Not out of fear, but because I knew I didn't need any more proof. Marcus would handle that part. I would handle the part that made them fall into the pit they had dug for themselves. At dusk, as the sunset painted the lake, I returned to the villa. Unseen, I unlocked the door with the old key hidden in the flower pot by the steps. Inside, the house was dark. I turned on the lights and looked around. Everything was the same, except for a few new boxes in the corner. On the table was a hastily written note. Painters are coming on Friday. Vanessa. I walked slowly to the photo of James on the shelf. The light caught his face, making his eyes in the picture seem to watch me. They think I've given up, James, I said softly. But I'm just making tea. I brought the teapot to the porch and sat in the familiar wooden chair. Steam rose, mingling with the mist from the lake. In the distance, the lights from a neighbor's house twinkled on the water. I heard an engine approaching, probably Derek coming back to check. I remained still. When the car stopped, I heard a door slam and footsteps. "Mom," his voice called out. I didn't turn around, just replied, "Out here." He walked onto the porch, his eyes filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Making tea?" I said lightly. "Am I not allowed in my own home?" He sighed. "Mom, we're trying to get things sorted. You doing this makes Vanessa worry." I stared out at the lake, not at him. "If she's worried, you can tell her I'm not going to do anything. Derek was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Mom, I know you're angry, but I'm in a difficult spot. You wouldn't understand." I turned, my gaze calm. "Really? Perhaps you're right. I'm too old to understand the deceptions of the young." His face changed. I stood, poured more tea, my voice still gentle. "You should go. It's getting late." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow. Don't stay too long." I watched him leave, the car's taillights disappearing into the night. I sat back down and finished my tea, the bitterness mixed with a sweet fragrance. In my mind, every step was laid out. They thought they were moving into a new house, but they were actually walking into a locked room where every wall knew how to speak the truth. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and returned to my apartment. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in years. No dreams, no startling awake. Only one feeling remained, the perfect quiet of someone who knows she is one step ahead. The next morning, a light rain fell over Burlington. Droplets slid down the glass of the office building where Derek worked, reflecting the city's silver-gray light. Inside, he sat at his desk, shirt wrinkled, tie loosened. His computer screen was full of unread emails, but his eyes were fixed on a notification in the center of the screen. "Your document is undergoing re-verification by the federal system." His heart stopped. He clicked, but the page was unresponsive. The message remained, silent and cold as a warning. He started to call IT, then stopped. Something deep inside told him this wasn't a technical glitch. This was the consequence of a mistake, and that mistake was named Evelyn Hart. The office door swung open. Gerald entered, his umbrella still dripping, his expensive coat damp. "You don't look well," he said flatly. Derek looked up, forcing a smile. "Just company business, nothing serious." Gerald pulled a chair to sit opposite him, his eyes piercing. "Don't lie to me, Derek. I heard you used the company server to file legal documents. Do you have any idea what that means?" Derek swallowed hard, his heart pounding. Where did you hear that?" "I have friends in the city's finance department," Gerald replied, his voice chillingly calm. "Did you think these things don't leave a trace? You're walking yourself into trouble." Derek turned away, staring out the window at the cars gliding through the rain. "I didn't have a choice," he said quietly. "Vanessa wanted that house. She said it was the only way her family would respect me." Gerald gave a cold laugh. "And so you forged documents. You're a bigger fool than I thought, Derek. But lucky for you, I can help, on one condition." Derek turned back, his eyes a mixture of fear and desperation. "What condition?" Gerald leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "You will sign over co-ownership of the villa to me. A small portion, say 30%. I'll handle the rest, erase all traces. No one has to know." Derek stared at him, his voice catching. "You're trying to take my mother's house?" "Not take," Gerald said slowly. "Protect an asset. Believe me, if the FBI finds out about this, you'll lose everything." That acronym, FBI, sent a chill down Derek's spine. He dropped his head into his hands, clutching his hair. Everything was spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple decision was now a disaster. Vanessa walked in just then, trailing a heavy perfume and a fake smile. "What are you two talking about?" she asked lightly. Gerald answered for him. "About how my talented son-in-law nearly got this entire family involved in a federal crime." Vanessa shot a glare at her husband. "What did you do?" Derek tried to keep his voice steady. "Nothing, just some administrative paperwork." "Administrative paperwork?" Gerald let out a dry laugh. "I've heard many euphemisms, but that one is special." Vanessa turned on her husband, her eyes flashing with anger. "You lied to me, didn't you, Derek? You said everything was legal." "It is legal," he shouted. "I just need one more signature. My mother would never sue her own son." "You think so?" Vanessa's voice turned to ice. "You don't know your mother, Derek. She has the eyes of someone who has survived a war. She's quiet, but she never gives up." Derek looked down at his desk, his hands trembling slightly. He knew his wife was right. Every time he replayed the dinner in his mind, he saw his mother's gaze, calmly terrifying. "Derek," Gerald said, his voice low, "I suggest you end this before it gets out of your control." He stood, put on his coat, and added before leaving, "And remember, if you drag me down, I'll take you with me." The door closed, leaving a thick silence. Vanessa sat down, her voice small. "You should listen to him. My father has connections. You don't want to be their laughingstock." "And what about you?" Derek asked, his voice lost. "What do you want out of all this?" Vanessa shrugged, sipping her coffee. "I want a life worthy of my efforts. You promised me that." Derek looked at her, his mind flooded with images of mornings at the villa, playing with his mother, his father building the steps by hand. All those memories now felt distant, like a faded dream. He wondered what he was doing, what he was fighting for, but no answer came. His phone buzzed, a message from his mother. "Hope you slept well. The lake is beautiful this morning. I'm making tea. You should come when you have time." No blame, no threats, just a gentle invitation. Derek read it over and over, then set the phone down. A part of him wanted to believe things could go back to the way they were, but another part knew it was too late. That evening, as Derek left the office, he saw Marcus standing across the street. The man wore a long black coat, speaking to someone on the phone, his eyes flicking toward him for a second. Derek's heart raced. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or intentional, but he felt like he was being watched. He quickened his pace, trying to calm himself. When he got home, Vanessa was at the door, her face a cold mask. "My father was right," she said. "We need to move our things in sooner. You should pack what you need." Derek stared at her, bewildered. "Are you kicking me out?" "No," she replied. "I just don't want to be here when it all falls apart." That night, Derek lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the rain fell harder, and distant thunder rumbled. He felt like he was adrift in a current, unable to grasp anything. Somewhere, his mother was probably sitting by the lake, drinking her tea, waiting, and he, the liar, was slowly being consumed by her silence. That afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight cast pale yellow streaks across Lakewood, I drove to the lake house. The air was so quiet, I could hear the gravel crunch under my tires. From a distance, I saw Derek's car parked by the porch, the front door wide open, and Vanessa's silhouette moving past a window. She was busy directing someone with furniture. I turned off the engine, sat in the car for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and got out. The early autumn air was cool and damp, mixed with the scent of wood and wild grass. As I approached, Vanessa came out, a perfectly painted smile on her face. "You're early, Mom," she said, her voice light, as if nothing unusual were happening. "We're just rearranging a few things, trying to make it more organized." I looked around. The living room smelled of fresh paint. Some of the furniture had been moved, and James's old painting was gone from the wall. In its place hung a vibrant red abstract piece, jarringly out of place in the house's warm space. "I remember that painting," I said, my gaze resting on the empty spot where our family photo used to hang. "I put it in the basement," Vanessa replied quickly, her tone so calm it could almost sound true. "We thought we'd make a few changes, give the house a new feel." I nodded slowly and walked toward the dining table. My hand-embroidered tablecloth had been replaced with a plain white one. Everything was clean, polished, and cold. The house no longer held the warmth of life, only the scent of an occupation being masked by politeness. "Where's Derek?" I asked, placing a bag with an apple pie on the table. "In the study," Vanessa answered. "He's on a call. Seems a little stressed." I gave a faint smile. "You know, he always works better under pressure." She let out a small laugh and shrugged. "Perhaps you're right, but you should tell him to rest. He's been so tired. Midlife pressure can make a man prone to mistakes." I turned to look at her, my gaze calm but sharp enough to make her take a half step back. "Thank you for the reminder," I said. "But age doesn't make me weaker. It just teaches me how to choose my moments." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. She turned away, pretending to arrange a vase of flowers. I walked toward the study door. Derek was hunched over the desk, his hair messy, his shirt wrinkled, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. "Yes, I understand. I'll get it done soon." "No, don't send any more emails. It'll only make things worse." His voice was tired, tinged with desperation. When he saw me, he hung up quickly and forced a smile. "Mom, you're here. You didn't have to drive all this way." "I brought apple pie," I replied, setting the box on his desk. "The kind I used to make for you when you were little." He looked at the box, silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "Thank you, Mom." I sat in the chair opposite him. The light from the window illuminated his face, revealing the small lines of anxiety around his eyes. "Is everything all right, Derek?" I asked. He gave a weak laugh, avoiding my gaze. "Fine, just tired. Vanessa is handling the decorating. She likes everything to be perfect." "Perfect," I repeated. A word people often use when they're trying to hide something imperfect. He looked up, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. "Are you starting again?" "No," I said gently. "I'm just asking if you know what you're losing." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Mom, I don't want to fight anymore. You don't understand. I'm trying to keep things stable. This house is my chance to win back the trust of Vanessa's family. They have influence, connections. I need them." I looked straight at him, my eyes unwavering. "Do you need them, or are you afraid of them?" Derek was silent, then forced a smile. "Old age is making you suspicious." "No," I replied. Old age is making me see more clearly." The words made him freeze. For a fleeting moment, I saw something shift in my son's eyes. But then Vanessa entered, her voice cutting through the tension. "What a nice chat. Would you like something to drink, Mom? I just made coffee." "I only drink tea," I answered. "Lavender tea. I brought my own." She gave a faint laugh. "Old habits die hard." "But they help me remember," I said, pouring tea into a cup. The fragrance filled the air, light yet deep, casting a strange quiet over the room. I looked at Vanessa, my voice slow. "You know, tea needs water that's hot enough, but not boiling. If it's too hot, the leaves turn bitter. Just like people. If you're too greedy, everything burns." Vanessa's lips tightened, her smile vanishing. "Are you implying something?" I set my teacup down, my voice steady. "No, just a small lesson in patience." Derek stood up, trying to break the tension. "Come on, we don't need to turn everything into a philosophy lesson. Vanessa, leave her be." She turned to her husband, her eyes as sharp as knives. "I was just talking." "Yes, but you forget you're talking to my mother," Derek replied, his voice suddenly harsh. She looked at him, then at me, and laughed faintly. "Age makes people soft. I get it. You don't want me touching her things. But sooner or later, you'll have to choose, Derek, between the past and the future." I stood up, my eyes fixed on Vanessa. "The future is only worth having when it's built on gratitude, not ambition," I said. Then I turned to Derek, my voice as soft as the wind. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to see if you were all right." Derek looked at me, helplessness written all over his face. "Don't worry about me, Mom. I'll handle it." "I'm sure you will," I replied, "because I know you'll have to face the truth, sooner or later." When I stepped onto the porch, the afternoon sun was a brilliant gold, and the lake shimmered. I heard the door close behind me, the sound of Vanessa's hurried footsteps, and her voice fading. "You let her talk to me like that?" Derek's response was low and tired. "Don't touch my mother anymore, Vanessa. You don't understand." I paused for a second, listened, and then smiled. They were starting to crack, the first fissure in the facade of those who thought they were in control. I walked down the steps, looking toward the lake. The light reflected off the water like thousands of tiny mirrors. In them, I saw James's face, calm and steady. "Everything is going according to plan, isn't it?" I whispered. "They're burning themselves out, James. I just have to wait for the fire to die." I left as the sun was setting, without looking back. Behind me, the soft click of the closing door was like a final note in the long symphony of retribution. I knew that from this day forward, no one in that house would sleep peacefully again, and I, in my silence, had officially taken back control. The day they moved in, the Lakewood sky was a dull gray, a thick blanket covering everything. Not a single ray of sun broke through the clouds, only a light wind blowing in gusts across the lake. I had woken early, brewed a pot of lavender tea, and sat silently by the window. Steam curled from the cup like thin smoke. The world around me was eerily quiet. No cars, no people, just the feeling of time holding its breath. Today was the day they would officially move into the villa, the home James and I had spent half a lifetime building. I looked into the distance and saw a large moving truck turning onto the dirt road leading to the porch, followed by Derek's familiar SUV. I put my teacup down, stood up, put on my gray coat, and took my keys. Not to stop them, but to bear witness. Some battles require no gunfire, only someone who knows the right moment to wait. When I arrived, Vanessa was already on the porch, phone in hand, directing the movers. "Careful, that cabinet is very expensive," she snapped, as one of the movers slipped. Gerald and Patricia stood nearby, observing as if they were supervising an investment project. Derek was opening the garage door, his expression anxious, but trying to look busy. I turned off the engine, opened the car door, and stepped out. No one noticed me immediately, not until the sound of my shoes on the steps. Vanessa turned, a thin smile appearing. "You're right on time, Mom," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice, but she couldn't hide her unease. "We're just moving things in, almost done." I nodded, my voice calm. "Good. I wanted to see what my house looks like with you all in it." Gerald approached, extending his hand. "Evelyn, so good to see you again. A big day for the family, isn't it?" I looked at his hand but didn't take it. "Yes, a big day," I said, "but not for everyone." He retracted his hand, gave a forced laugh, and turned away. Vanessa crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "Don't misunderstand. We just want to bring new life to the house. You can come here whenever you want." I smiled faintly, my gaze turning to the living room, where James had once placed the wooden chair he had made himself. Now, it was replaced by a light-colored leather armchair. "New life," I repeated, "often comes with burying old memories." Derek appeared at the door, his face tense. "Mom," he said quietly, "don't make a scene. I just want today to pass peacefully." I turned to look at him. "Peace is not something you can demand when you're the one who shattered it, Derek." He swallowed hard and lowered his head. I walked into the house. The smell of fresh paint was sharp and cold. Everything had been rearranged. The family photos were gone, replaced by soulless abstract art. I walked slowly around the room, my hand gliding over the tabletop. The wooden table James and I had polished with beeswax was now covered with a cold, clear sheet of glass. "Careful, Mom," Vanessa said from behind me, her tone laced with a warning. "You wouldn't want to scratch the table." I turned back, my expression placid. "I won't. Real wood is hard to scratch. It's only the imitations that damage easily." The comment made Vanessa freeze, while Patricia looked at me with a mix of annoyance and apprehension. "Evelyn," she said, "we know this isn't easy for you, but sometimes change is for the better." I nodded. "Perhaps you're right. But change is not the same as betrayal." The room fell silent. Only the wind whistled through a crack in the door. Derek came over, his voice low. "Mom, you should go home and rest. Everything is ready. Don't make everyone uncomfortable." I looked at him, my eyes cold and deep. "You don't need to worry. I just came to make sure you know what you're doing." I took a small envelope from my pocket and placed it on the table. "I brought you some papers. These might help you better understand the house you're moving into." Vanessa, curious, stepped closer. "What papers are those?" "The ones James and I signed 10 years ago," I replied. "The original Hart family trust deed." Derek opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. His eyes scanned the lines quickly, then stopped at the end. I saw the color drain from his face. "Mom," he said softly, "this—" I cut him off. "Yes, this house doesn't belong to me, nor does it belong to you. It belongs to the trust, which you have no right to interfere with while I am alive." Vanessa gave a forced laugh, trying to regain her confidence. "There must be some mistake. Our lawyer said—" I interrupted her. "Your lawyer didn't read carefully, and I believe he's about to get a call from someone else." Just then, the phone in Derek's pocket buzzed. He looked at the screen, his eyes filled with panic. "It's the law firm," he whispered. He answered, and I saw his hand tremble. "Yes, this is Derek Hart." "What? No, I didn't know that. I didn't file anything incorrectly." Vanessa moved closer, trying to eavesdrop, but Derek had already hung up, his face ashen. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "They said my filing is under investigation for signs of forgery." I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm. "You see, everything returns to its rightful place. You just refuse to look." Gerald and Patricia exchanged worried glances. Vanessa tried to smile. "It must be a mistake, Derek. My father can fix it." But Derek didn't answer. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. I stood there watching, saying nothing more. Everything was unfolding exactly as Marcus and I had planned. I turned to go out onto the porch. The wind from the lake was blowing harder, tossing my hair. "I'm leaving now," I said, looking back at them one last time. "You all can stay. This house is large, but not everyone has a heart big enough to live in it." I walked down the steps, the sound of the wind mingling with the lapping waves. Behind me, I heard Vanessa call out, but I didn't stop. I knew in that moment they had started to feel fear. Not because of what I did, but because of what they had done. And now, it was coming back to them. As I left, a light rain began to fall, each drop hitting the lake and creating widening ripples. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the villa's silhouette blurring in the mist, its lights still on, like a wide-open eye in the night. An eye watching the every move of those who thought they had won. I knew this quiet moment was just the calm before the storm, and when it hit, no one would be prepared. The next morning, I awoke earlier than usual. A weak, hazy sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting pale streaks on the wall like the breath of a waiting storm. I made tea, not to relax, but to keep my hands from shaking. Everything was about to end, and I knew today would be a day they would never forget. I looked at the clock, 7:30. A strange sense of calm settled over me, like a chess player who knows victory is certain before the final move. The phone rang, displaying Marcus's name. I answered. "We're ready?" His voice was deep and clear. "They'll arrive at 10. Don't act surprised." I simply replied, "I'm never surprised, Marcus. I just wait for them to reveal themselves." He chuckled softly, then hung up. Around 9, I drove to the villa. The lakeside road was still damp from the previous night's rain. When I arrived, the house was already bustling. A small truck was parked in the driveway, and workers were carrying in new furniture. Vanessa stood on the porch in a fur coat, a list in her hand. Beside her was Derek, his face exhausted, his eyes puffy from a sleepless night. They saw me, and for a moment, both of them froze. "What are you doing here?" Derek asked, his voice raw. "I just came to see if you're settling in all right," I replied calmly. "After all, this is still our home." Vanessa gave a strained smile. "We're busy. You can sit on the porch if you'd like." I didn't answer, just walked inside. In the living room, papers were still scattered on the table. Amid the mess, I saw a file with a familiar red seal. I walked over, picked it up, and skimmed it. My name, Derek's signature, the electronic confirmation stamp. But what made me smile wasn't the signature. It was the final line, filed by user. I closed the file, set it down, and turned to my son. "You filed this yourself, didn't you?" I asked, my voice so soft it made Vanessa turn around. Derek frowned, his voice stiff. "What are you asking?" "Of course I filed it. Who else would?" I nodded and stepped closer. "Good. I just wanted to hear you say it." Vanessa glanced at her husband, confused. "What's going on?" I turned to her, a fleeting smile on my lips. "Your husband just admitted to something very important." Just then, the sound of car engines came from the gate. 2 sleek black SUVs pulled up, their doors opening almost in unison. I didn't turn around, just said quietly, "You have guests." The door opened, and 2 men in suits walked in, followed by Marcus, his face grim. "Mr. Derek Hart," the taller man said, pulling out a badge. "We're federal agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding the filing and forgery of ownership documents for the Hart family villa." The room went still. Vanessa took a step back, her hand clutching her husband's shoulder. "There must be some mistake," Derek stammered, his voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong." Marcus stepped forward and placed the authentic file on the table. "This document was submitted from your company's IP address on the 12th of this month at 10:37 a.m. We've verified it. You also signed using an invalid electronic signature." Derek's face went pale. He looked at me, his voice choked. "Mom, did you report me?" I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam rising in the tense silence. "No," I replied. "I simply sent the real documents to the proper authorities. You, on the other hand, sent the fake ones. You chose this ending for yourself, Derek." Vanessa screamed, "This is a setup! You framed us!" I looked at her, my gaze unwavering. "No, Vanessa. I just sat still, and you walked right into it. A house, a signature, and a lie. That was all it took." Patricia ran down the stairs, her face ashen. "We didn't know anything about this." Gerald stood behind her, his voice hoarse. "Evelyn, you don't have to do this." I set my teacup down, the soft clink echoing in the room. "I haven't done anything. I only protected what James and I built with our own hands." One of the agents stepped forward and said clearly, "Mr. Hart, we need you to come with us for questioning. This is an official warrant." Derek collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Vanessa tried to remain composed, turning to me. "You've won. You've destroyed this family. Are you satisfied?" I walked slowly toward her, my voice low and cold. "A family isn't shattered by the one who tells the truth, but by those who treat kinship as a commodity to be traded. You can buy new paint, but you can't buy back dignity." Marcus signaled to the agents, then turned to me. "We'll take it from here, Evelyn. You should get some rest." I nodded, my eyes still on Derek. "Son," I said softly, "sometimes a mother's silence isn't weakness. It's the only way for you to learn the consequences of your own actions." He didn't answer. His eyes were empty, as if he had just seen everything he had lost. I picked up my handbag and walked out to the porch. The wind from the lake blew strong, carrying the smell of new paint and old wine. I paused and turned to look at the house one last time. "Be careful with the tea, agents," I said lightly, a faint smile on my lips. "It's a bit bitter, but it helps one stay awake." As I walked down the steps, the midday sun shone on the lake, reflecting the image of men in black suits leading Derek to a car. Vanessa stood at the door, her eyes filled with hatred. I didn't look back. I just walked away, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel, each sound like a final punctuation mark on a chapter of my life. Behind me, the car door slammed shut, its sound echoing on the wind. The lake house, once a sanctuary, was now chillingly silent. I knew that from this day forward, it would no longer be a symbol of loss, but a testament to justice, a justice that required no shouting, only a person patient enough to smile at the right time. I got in my car, rolled down the window, and let the wind in. In the distance, the lake rippled and the sky began to clear. I touched James's wedding ring on my finger and whispered, "It's over, my love. The house is ours again." Then I drove away, leaving behind the villa standing silent against the wind and water, a witness to a quiet justice. That afternoon, Lakewood was shrouded in a thick fog, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. News of the investigation spread faster than expected. I sat in my small apartment in Burlington, the local news channel on. The anchor's voice was steady. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed the arrest of an employee of Burlington Financial on charges of forging property transfer documents valued at over $3 million. The suspect, Derek Hart, 38, is currently in custody for questioning. I turned off the TV before they finished. In the small room, only the ticking of the wall clock remained. I poured more tea, my hands strangely calm, not out of satisfaction, but out of peace. It had happened just as James used to say, sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, but from letting people see themselves in the mirror. At dusk, the phone rang. It was Marcus. "The FBI has finished the initial phase," he said. "Derek will be released on bail, but they've frozen his accounts and traced money transfers into Gerald and Patricia's funds. They're tied to a money laundering scheme." I was silent for a moment, then replied, "I suppose he didn't think his games would come back to him so quickly." "No one ever does," Marcus said quietly. "And that's why we win. But Evelyn, are you sure you want to see this through to the end? When they lose everything, who will they blame?" I looked out the window, the city lights reflecting on the glass. "I don't need them to blame me," I said slowly. "I just need them to stop." Marcus sighed. "You've stopped them, but they haven't. I have a feeling Vanessa won't stay quiet." He was right. 2 days later, Vanessa appeared at my apartment door. It was raining, and her coat was soaked, mascara smudged around her eyes. When I opened the door, she looked at me like someone lost in the night. "Are you happy now?" Her voice was choked and raspy, like metal scraping against metal. "You've ruined everything. Derek lost his job. My parents are being investigated, and everyone looks at me like a criminal." I looked at her, my voice calm. "No one ruined your family, Vanessa. You crushed it with your own hands when you thought you could buy kinship with power." She stepped inside, standing in the middle of the living room, trembling. "You don't understand," she said. "I just wanted to be recognized. My whole life I've lived in my parents' shadow. They told me to marry a successful man, to make them proud. Derek was the only way. I just wanted a better life." I looked at her for a long, long time. Long. In that moment, under the soft yellow light, she no longer looked like the arrogant woman who had sat in my house, but like a lost child. "A better life," I repeated, my voice as soft as the wind. "But do you know what better is? It doesn't come from taking from others. It comes from keeping your own hands clean." Vanessa burst into tears, the teardrops mingling with the rain still on her cheeks. "You've won," she said, sobbing. "You were always the cleverest one, but you've lost your son. Does that make you happy?" I was silent, then walked to the table and poured her a cup of tea. "No," I said. "I'm not happy. I'm sad. Sad that people like you could have done everything right if you had just known when to stop." She took the cup with trembling hands, not daring to look at me. "Derek. He wants to see you. He's at the house. He said he needs to talk." I nodded slowly. "All right, but only when he's truly ready to tell the truth." That night, I drove to the villa again. The house was lit, but no longer bustling. I saw Derek sitting on the porch, a bottle of wine in his hand, his gaze fixed on the lake. As I approached, he didn't look up. "I knew they were coming for me," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "Marcus told me everything." I stood beside him, not answering. He gave a weak laugh and looked up at me. "You know, Mom, I used to think you were weak. When Dad died, you didn't cry. When I moved out, you didn't try to stop me. I thought you had no feelings left. But you were just waiting, weren't you?" I nodded slightly. "Yes, I was waiting for you to see who you were becoming." He put the bottle down and buried his head in his hands. "I don't know when I became so awful," he said. "I just wanted to make Vanessa happy, but I ruined everything. Now I have nothing left." I looked out at the lake, its surface strangely still. "You still have a chance," I said. "Cooperate with them. Tell them everything you know. Don't let others drag you down deeper." He was quiet for a long time, then asked softly, "Do you hate me, Mom?" I turned and looked directly at him. "No, I hate your blindness. But you are my flesh and blood. I can be angry, I can punish, but I will never hate you." He bowed his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. In the wind, I heard a choked sob, small and real. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my own hand trembling slightly, but my gaze was steady. "You don't have to say any more. Now, you need to stand up. Tomorrow will be different." He looked at me, his eyes tired but clearer. "I don't deserve it." I gave a small smile. "No one deserves forgiveness, Derek. People just learn not to repeat their mistakes." In that moment, we sat beside each other, saying nothing more. There was only the sound of water lapping against the shore and the faint moonlight on the lake. For the first time in years, I felt the house was no longer heavy. Though the walls were still cold and the chairs unfamiliar, it was no longer a symbol of pain. It had returned to its original meaning, a place to reflect and let go. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus. "The FBI has completed the file," he said. "Gerald and Patricia are being formally indicted. Derek will be granted immunity if he cooperates. He's disclosed the entire money laundering chain." I was silent, then said quietly, "Thank you, Marcus. You kept your word." He gave a small laugh. "No, Evelyn. You were the one who brought them down, not with force, but with the truth." I looked out at the lake. The morning light fell on the water, making it glitter like shattered glass. In it, I saw the reflections of faces that had once been proud, now as broken as that glass. No more shouting, no more resentment. All that was left was a heavy silence, the silence of justice served in the gentlest yet sharpest of ways. I closed the door and poured more tea. The scent of lavender filled the room, mingling with the dawn light. James used to say, "There is no revenge so noble as to live in peace." Today, I understood that completely. The next morning, Lakewood seemed to have awakened from a long nightmare. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the pale, drifting clouds and the scent of morning mist mixed with the damp wood of the surrounding trees. I sat on the porch, a cup of lavender tea in my hand, watching the light glide across the water. I hadn't slept last night, not out of fear or worry, but from a strange feeling inside me, both serene and painful. It was over, and like all storms, it left behind a frightening quiet. A car engine sounded in the distance. I turned to see Marcus's car stop at the gate. He got out, wearing a dark coat, his stride quick and efficient. "Disturbing you this early," he said, as he stepped onto the porch, "but I thought you'd want the latest news." I invited him to sit and poured him some tea. He took the cup, his gaze sweeping over the lake before returning to me. "Gerald and Patricia have officially pleaded guilty," he said. "They tried to negotiate, but the evidence of transactions from their accounts to the Cayman Islands was confirmed. The FBI also found proof that Vanessa was the listed owner of a shell company." I said nothing, just nodded slowly. "And Derek?" "He's in Boston, cooperating with the investigation," Marcus replied. "If nothing changes, he'll receive full immunity, but—" He paused, looking at me as if weighing his words. "He wants to see you, alone, with no one else." I set my teacup down, the steam blurring my eyes. "As it should be," I said softly. "Every story needs an ending." Marcus looked at me, his voice softening. "Evelyn, you know, most people would celebrate after winning a battle like this, but not you. You just sit here drinking tea as if you regret something." I smiled faintly. "Because I understand that this victory makes no one happy. It only stops people from continuing to do wrong." He nodded, saying no more. That afternoon, Derek came. He stood at the gate for a long time before walking in, as if another step might make him collapse. As he drew closer, I noticed he was thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes dark-ringed but brighter than before. "Mom," he said, his voice as hoarse as if it had been carried on the wind. "I don't know where to begin." I looked at him, my voice gentle. "Begin with the truth. It's always the easiest way to talk." He sat in the chair opposite me, his hands clasped, his fingers trembling slightly. I signed. I submitted. I lied. Everything was driven by fear. Fear of not being respected, fear of not being good enough, fear of being left behind. But I didn't realize I was leaving behind the most important thing, you. The wind blew across the porch, making the curtains sway. I looked at him, my gaze calm but deep. "You were wrong, but at least today you dare to face it. Not everyone can do that." He laughed, his voice choked. "I don't deserve to be forgiven." I took a sip of tea, the bitter taste followed by a hint of sweetness. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, Derek. It's a choice. And I have chosen peace, not resentment." He bowed his head, a tear falling onto the wooden table. "I can't go back, can I?" "No one can go back," I replied. "But you can move forward, differently." We sat there for a long time without another word. The afternoon sun shone on the porch, stretching our shadows like two parallel memories. When the light began to fade, Derek finally stood up. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to leave this place. I need to start over. Not for anyone else, but for myself." I nodded, gently touching his shoulder. "Don't carry regret with you. Just carry the lesson." He looked at me, his eyes moist, then turned away. As his figure disappeared beyond the gate, I felt a weight lift from me, though a dull ache remained in my heart. As evening fell, I went out to the porch and lit a small candle. Its light flickered on James's photo on the table. I said softly, "You see, it's all burned away now, the greed, the lies, the resentment. Only ashes remain." In the flickering flame, James's face seemed to be smiling. "I kept the house," I continued, "but what's more precious is that I kept my peace." I sat there, listening to the wind on the roof and the lapping of the waves. In my mind, I saw all the faces that had passed through: Vanessa with her bitter tears, Derek with his remorseful gaze, Gerald and Patricia bowing before justice. They all dissolved into dust, like the embers of a great fire. When the candle burned out, I stood and went to the kitchen. On the wall, James's old clock ticked steadily, a rhythm like a heartbeat. I opened the window, letting in the night breeze. Outside, the lakewood sky was clearing, and on the lake, the silver moonlight cast a faint, bright path to the other shore, a path of serenity. I watched for a long time, then whispered, "What's left after the fire isn't loss. It's truth, and the truth will always outlive any lie." I turned off the lights, letting the house sink into a gentle darkness. In the silence, the soft lapping of water on the shore sounded like the even breathing of someone finally set free. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not a smile of victory, but the smile of one who has walked through a storm and remains standing. The next morning, as the first light filtered through the curtains, I heard a soft knock on the door. The postman stood on the porch, holding an ivory envelope with the old seal of the law firm Harper & Lowell, Boston. I froze for a moment. It was the firm that had represented James when he drafted the Hart Family Trust years ago. "Mrs. Hart?" the postman asked. I nodded. "I'll sign for it," I said quietly, taking the envelope. My fingers touched the thick paper, its familiar texture like a piece of memory. I didn't open it right away. I brewed a pot of tea, brought it out to the porch, and sat in the old wooden chair. The lake shimmered under the sun, reflecting small, gentle ripples, like the breath of time. The wind carried the scent of early autumn maple, earthy and sweet. I took a long breath and opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a document carefully enclosed in a plastic sleeve. The slanted handwriting on the paper was achingly familiar. It was James's. I traced the blue ink with my fingers, my hand trembling slightly. Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I paused, took a deep breath, and continued. I know you will worry. You will try to hold on to everything, to protect the house, to protect what we built. But I also know that one day, our son may lose his way. Don't be too hard on him, Eve. He carries a part of my weakness in him, the belief that love is enough to fix things. But life isn't that simple. You will have to be stronger than me, tougher than I ever wished for you. I put the letter down and breathed deeply. The early light on the lake cast a golden reflection in my eyes, and for a moment it felt like we were talking again. I continued reading. I arranged everything in the trust to protect you, even after I'm gone. If Derek tries to change anything, the documents will automatically trigger a federal verification system. I know he would never intentionally harm you, but this world makes it easy to forget what is right and wrong. When that happens, don't let your tears guide you. Let your reason do its work. And when you win, and I believe you will, don't let your heart turn to stone. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the way you keep from living with the fire forever. I felt a lump form in my throat. All these years, I thought I had been fighting this battle alone, but James had known. He had always known. Even in his absence, he was one step ahead, not with power, but with his faith in me. I turned to the next page. There was a short line, written last, more shaky, perhaps from his final days. Eve, if you are reading this, please make a pot of lavender tea. Have a cup for me. And when you look out at the lake, remember, the waves can wash away all footprints, but they cannot erase the steps that were once taken with conviction. I love you. Always. James. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. My heart beat slowly, like the rhythm of a returning memory. In that moment, I no longer heard the wind, the water, or the clock. There was only a silence as deep as the lake itself, where two old souls met again through words. I made a pot of tea and poured 2 cups, one for me, one placed next to James's photograph. The scent of lavender filled the porch, mingling with the morning sun. I sat quietly and whispered, "You always knew, didn't you, James? About Derek, about everything." I let out a soft laugh, tears falling onto the back of my hand. "You always believed I was strong enough, calm enough, to see this through. And I did." I raised my teacup and said softly, "For you, for everything." Then I took a sip. The tea was bitter at first, then sweet at the back of my throat, as if it too understood. Bitterness is for remembering, sweetness is for forgiving. I took the remaining document from the envelope, an addendum to the trust that James had signed, stating clearly, "All assets upon my passing, including the Lakewood Villa, shall transfer to the management of Evelyn Hart, and upon her passing, the property shall be converted into the Lakewood Charitable Foundation, supporting elderly women who have suffered abuse and lost their homes." I read each word slowly, then smiled. "You always thought further ahead than I did," I said softly, "even when I was only thinking of keeping this house for myself." I folded the paper and placed it in the frame with our wedding photo, replacing the old picture. "This house will no longer be a symbol of pain, James. It will be a place of new beginnings for those who need hope." That afternoon, I went to the lake shore, watching the calm, sprawling water. Derek called. His voice was choked, but steady. "Mom, Marcus told me about the foundation. Was that your decision?" "No," I said, my voice softening. "It was your father's. He always believed that the only way to heal pain is to turn it into something useful." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Derek said quietly, "I'll help you do it, no matter how long it takes." I nodded, though he couldn't see. "Good. That is how you pay it all back." That evening, as the sunset painted the lake, dyeing the water gold, I felt a deep sense of peace. No more cracks, no more hatred, only the echoes of things left unsaid. And on the thin breeze I could almost hear James's voice, soft, deep, and warm. I always knew you would do the right thing. I closed my eyes and smiled, and I always knew you never really left. 2 months later, autumn had painted the town of Lakewood in gold. The fiery maple trees lined the road to the villa, which once a silent battlefield of pain and betrayal was now bathed in the gentle morning light. From a distance, a new sign could be seen at the gate: the Lakewood Foundation for Elder Women's Dignity and Renewal. I stood looking at the sign for a long time, a feeling both strange and familiar washing over me. One chapter had closed, and another, more beautiful, more compassionate, had just begun. The villa had been renovated, but it hadn't lost its old spirit. The same dark wood, the same porch overlooking the lake, but now with pots of vibrant purple lavender blooming on either side of the steps. The laughter of elderly women echoed through the air. They were cleaning, arranging flowers, preparing for the opening day. Their faces, some with silver hair, some younger than me, all held the same look, the look of those who had been overlooked, forgotten, and were now finding themselves again. I walked slowly down the hallway where Vanessa had once adjusted tablecloths, where Derek had once bowed his head in shame. Now it was hung with black and white photographs, women gardening, laughing in the sun, studying, drinking tea. In the center was a small plaque engraved with words James had once written in another letter I found in the wooden chest. Forgiveness doesn't erase the fire. It teaches you how to walk through it. I touched the plaque, my heart swelling with emotion. Perhaps, for the first time since he had passed, I truly understood what he wanted to teach, not just to protect property, but to protect the value of compassion. Marcus entered from the back door, a folder in his hand. "Evelyn," he said, "it's all done. The foundation is officially licensed. The first application has already arrived, a widow in Burlington whose daughter-in-law took her home." I looked at him and smiled. "How ironic," I said. "But perhaps all painful stories know the right place to start over." He nodded. "You've turned your own wound into a light for others. Not many people can do that." We went out to the porch. Volunteers were hanging a banner, preparing a small party to launch the foundation. I heard joyful laughter mixed with the sound of a young student playing a guitar. The lake reflected the golden sunlight, sparkling like a mirror. I turned to Marcus. "James used to say that every house has a soul. When it's wounded, only kindness can heal it." Marcus looked at me, his voice soft. "And you've done that, Evelyn. Lakewood is no longer a place of loss." In the crowd, I recognized Derek. He stood at a distance, dressed in a simple shirt, no longer looking lost or burdened. When our eyes met, he smiled, a tired but genuine smile. He walked over, greeted Marcus, then turned to me. "I helped Marcus with the paperwork, and if you'll have me, I'd like to work here, to help those who need legal aid, people like you were." I looked at my son for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You don't need my permission, Derek. This is your home, and it is also the place where you can atone." He smiled faintly, his eyes welling up. "I understand now, Mom. It's not about holding on to property. Holding on to people's hearts is the hardest part." That afternoon, the small ceremony began. No fuss, no cameras, just a few neighbors and the faces that had helped me through the difficult days. I gave a short speech. The Lakewood Foundation was created not for revenge, but to prevent stories like mine from repeating. We cannot change the past, but we can use it to illuminate the present. Applause rang out, soft but sincere. I saw a few people wipe away tears. When everyone began to leave, I stayed on the porch alone, watching the sunset. The final light turned the lake into a blaze of red, like a gentle fire burning on the water. I poured a cup of tea and placed it on the wooden table where James used to sit. "You see," I whispered, "the old wound has turned into light, a light that you and I created together, even though you are far away." In the distance, Derek was helping rehang a small sign at the gate. The wind billowed his shirt, and the sound of laughter drifted back. I looked at the scene, the peace I once thought would never return, and felt as if James were standing somewhere nearby, hands in his pockets, smiling down. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The scents of lavender, wood, and tea mingled on the gentle breeze. I knew that from now on, this lake house would no longer be a place of bitter words, contemptuous looks, or tears. It would be a place where people learned to stand up again, a place where every old pain would be turned into a seed of compassion. The sun slowly set behind the trees. The last light touched the sign at the gate, highlighting the small words beneath the foundation's name, founded in memory of James and Evelyn Hart, because healing is the quietest kind of revenge. I smiled softly. Perhaps that was the final answer to everything. The winter mornings at Lakewood always had a silent beauty, as if the world knew to hush and listen to the lake breathe. I woke while it was still misty, made tea, and stepped onto the porch. The chill crept under my collar, but my heart was warm. Across the lake, thin gray clouds were dissolving, revealing a pale blue sky. The water reflected the villa, no longer the proud Hart Villa, but the Lakewood Foundation, a place where, every day, someone walked in to reclaim a piece of their stolen dignity. I sat in the wooden chair James had made, the steaming teacup in my hands. On the table was a stack of letters from women who had been helped, a widow who regained her seized home, an elderly woman who received legal aid to escape her abusive son, a mother whose assets were protected after her husband's death. Each letter was written in a trembling hand, but filled with hope. I read them one by one, smiling. Perhaps, I thought, this is the justice James wanted. The sound of the door opening behind me made me turn. Derek came out, holding 2 cups of coffee, still wearing the old brown coat he used to wear in college. "You made coffee by mistake," I said with a small laugh. "I'm still loyal to my tea." He set a cup on the table and sat beside me, his gaze more peaceful than ever. "I know," Derek said, "but I remember you used to drink coffee with Dad on Sunday mornings. He would tell stories and you would just listen." I looked at him, my eyes softening. "That's right," I replied. "Your father always told stories that made me lose all track of time." "Now it's your turn to tell them," Derek said with a gentle smile, "because now you're the one who makes people forget their fear." We sat there, watching the ripples on the lake. In the distance, a few volunteers were tending the garden, their laughter mixing with the wind. I said, "You see, Derek, peace isn't something you buy with money. It comes when you're brave enough to stop needing to prove anything." Derek was silent, then said quietly, "I know. I lost so much to understand that. But thanks to you, I have the most precious thing left, the truth." I placed my hand on his, so lightly I was afraid to break the peaceful moment. "The truth can hurt you, but it's also what heals you." Derek nodded. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa left. She went to Florida to start over. I don't resent her anymore. Maybe she was just lost, too." I smiled, my gaze distant. "You're learning. Forgiveness isn't for them because they deserve it. It's for you because you don't want to carry that weight forever." A light breeze blew past, making the lavender blossoms tremble. I looked up and saw a small bird land on the railing, chirping softly. In that moment, all the memories of the stormy days, the arguments, the tears, the bitter words, dissolved like mist on the lake. All that remained was the sound of the present, the water, the leaves, the laughter of those being helped. I said softly, as if James were sitting right beside me, "You see, everything is calm now. My revenge wasn't to destroy anyone, but to make them face themselves. And in the end, the only thing I kept was peace." I looked up, the sunlight glinting on my teacup like thousands of tiny crystals. "It turns out," I continued, "the quietest revenge is to live the best life, to let the wicked see themselves in the mirror, and to let the wounded find their compassion again." Derek looked at his mother, his eyes filled with love. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm so proud of you." I smiled and replied, "No, Derek, I'm just a woman who realized she no longer has time for hate." He took my hand, his own warm and steady. In the distance, the women of the foundation were taking a group photo under the sign, their voices rising joyfully. Smile! A simple word that held an entire journey of healing. As the sun set, I lit a small candle on the porch. The flickering light cast a golden trail on the water, connecting the sky and the lake. I whispered, as if to the wind, "For you, James. For us." And on that gentle breeze, I thought I heard his reply, soft, deep, like a breath. "You did it, Eve. You turned the wound into light." I smiled, a slow, peaceful smile, the smile of someone who finally understood that the quietest revenge is to live with kindness and serenity until the very end. The end.